Good morning. I'm Stephen Leake. I'm an elder at First Presbyterian Church in Mesquite, Texas, and I'm also the teacher of the Discipleship Sunday School class there. Today we continue with our study of the book of John, and we're in chapter 11, the story of how Jesus came to raise Lazarus from the dead. Now, I want to remind you that for our curriculum, we're using the Daily Bible Study Series by Professor William Barclay. And for our scripture readings, we're using the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, which is the Bible that we use in the pews of our church. So let's get started. Last week, instead of going directly to Bethany, when Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he went to the place where John the Baptist had baptized him, which is north of Jerusalem on the Jordan River. Today, Jesus decides to visit Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus. So that's where we take up today. Our first scripture reading is John 11 through 16. After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, then he'll be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was also called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Now, John here uses his normal method of relating a conversation of Jesus. In the fourth gospel, Jesus' conversations always follow the same pattern. Jesus says something which sounds quite simple. His saying is misunderstood, and he goes on to explain more fully and unmistakably what he actually meant. So it was with his conversations with Nicodemus about being born again back in chapter 3, and his conversations with the woman at the well about the water of life in chapter 4. Jesus here began by saying that Lazarus was sleeping. To the disciples, that sounded like good news, for often there's no better medicine than sleep. But the word sleep has always had a deeper and more serious meaning. Jesus said of Jairus' daughter that she was asleep in Matthew 9, verse 24. And at the end of Stephen's martyrdom, after he had been stoned, we are told that he fell asleep, Acts 7, verse 60. And Paul speaks about those who sleep in Jesus, 1 Thessalonians 4:13. So Jesus had to tell them plainly that Lazarus was dead, and then he went on to say that for their sake, this was a good thing, because it would produce an event which would buttress them even more firmly in their faith. The final proof of Christianity is the sight of what Jesus Christ can do. Words may fail to convince, but there's no argument against God in action. It's the simple fact that the power of Jesus Christ has made cowards into heroes, doubters into men and women of certainty, and selfish people into servants of all. Above all, it's the plain fact of history that again and again, the power of Christ has made bad people good. That is what lays so tremendous a responsibility on us as individual Christians. The design of God is that every one of us should be living proof of His power. Our task is not so much to commend Christ in words, because an argument can always be produced against our words, but to demonstrate in our lives just what Christ has done for us. The director of the British Broadcasting Corporation, Sir John Reith, once said, "I do not like crises, but I like the opportunities which they supply." The death of Lazarus brought a crisis to Jesus, and He was glad because it gave Him the opportunity to demonstrate in the most amazing way what God can do. For us, every crisis should be an opportunity. At that moment, the disciples might well have refused to follow Jesus. Then one lonely voice spoke up. They were all feeling that to go to Jerusalem was to go to their deaths, and they were hanging back. Then came the voice of Thomas, "Let us go too, that we may die with Him." Now, all Jews in those days had two names, one a Hebrew name by which people were known in their own circle, and the other a Greek name by which they were known in a wider circle. Thomas is Hebrew, and Didymus the Greek for a twin. Now, Peter is the Greek, and Cephas is the Hebrew, which means a rock. At this moment, Thomas displayed the highest kind of courage. Theologian R.H. Strachan said, "This was not expectant faith, but loyal despair." But Thomas was determined. Come what may, he would not quit, and that is the highest kind of courage. It does not mean not being afraid. If we are not afraid, it's easy to act. Real courage means being perfectly aware of the worst that can happen and being sickly afraid of it, and yet doing the right thing. Our second scripture reading is chapter 11, verses 17 through 19. When Jesus arrived, He found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, just some 2 miles away. And many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. Now, in order to visualize this scene, we must first see what a Jewish house in mourning was like. Normally in Palestine, because of the climate, burial followed death as quickly as possible. It was a time when a funeral was exceedingly costly. The finest spices and ointments were used to anoint the body. The body itself was clothed in the most magnificent robes, and all kinds of valuables were buried in the tomb along with the body. And all of this had become a ruinous expenditure. Well, as many as possible attended a funeral, and everyone who could was supposed to join the procession on its way to the tomb. And at the tomb, memorial speeches were made, and when leaving the tomb, everyone was expected to express the deepest sympathy to the family. In the house of mourning, there were set customs. As long as the body was in the house, eating meat or drinking wine was forbidden. As soon as the body was carried out, and upon return from the tomb, a meal was served. Deep mourning lasted for 7 days, of which the first 3 days were days of weeping. And during the 7 days, it was forbidden to anoint oneself, to wear shoes, to engage in any kind of study or business, and even to wash. So when Jesus found a crowd in the house at Bethany, he found that what anyone would expect to find in a Jewish house of mourning. It was a sacred duty to come to express loving sympathy with friends and relations. So respect for the dead and sympathy for the mourner were an essential part of Jewish duty. And there's something special in the way in which the Jews stressed the duty of showing sympathy to the mourners. So when Jesus came to that house in Bethany, he would have found a house crowded with love and sympathy. Thank you for joining me today. God bless each and every one of you.